Wonders of Oz, Dorothy's Terrifying Adventure.
Chapter 1: The Twisted Tornado. Dorothy had always been afraid of thunderstorms. The loud claps of thunder and bright flashes of lightning made her feel like the world was ending. So, when she saw the ominous clouds forming in the distance, she knew she had to get home fast. She lived on a farm with her Aunt Em and Uncle Henry, and they had told her to never be outside during a storm. But Dorothy had been playing with her dog Toto, and she had lost track of time. As she raced towards the farmhouse, the winds picked up, and she had to hold on to her hat to keep it from blowing away. Toto barked frantically, and Dorothy knew he was scared too. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning struck a nearby tree, and the loud crack startled Dorothy and Toto. She stumbled and fell, but before she could get up, a fierce gust of wind lifted her off the ground and carried her away. Dorothy closed her eyes and screamed as the wind tossed her around like a rag doll. Toto clung onto her tightly, whimpering with fear. After what felt like hours, the wind finally died down, and Dorothy opened her eyes to find herself in a strange and unfamiliar place. She sat up, rubbing her sore arms, and looked around. Everything was different. The grass was a strange shade of green, and the trees were twisted and gnarled. The sky was a dark purple, and there was a sickly green glow emanating from the horizon. Toto whined and licked her face, but Dorothy was too busy trying to figure out where she was. "Where are we, Toto?" she asked, but he just wagged his tail and looked around. As she stood up, Dorothy noticed that her house had landed on top of a witch, crushing her. The witch's red slippers were sticking out from under the house, and her striped socks were stained with blood. Dorothy was terrified, but she knew she had to find help. She saw a road leading off into the distance and decided to follow it. Toto barked happily and ran ahead, his tail wagging excitedly. As they walked, the air grew colder, and the trees seemed to close in around them. Dorothy heard strange noises coming from the bushes and felt like she was being watched. She looked up at the sky and saw a giant, swirling vortex of clouds. "Is that a tornado?" she whispered to herself, but before she could do anything, the tornado swooped down and engulfed her and Toto. Dorothy closed her eyes and held onto Toto tightly as the tornado lifted them high into the air. She felt sick and dizzy as they spun around, and she could hear the witches cackling laughter in the distance. Suddenly, the tornado dropped them, and they crashed onto the ground with a thud. Dorothy groaned and rubbed her head, but when she looked up, she saw that they were in a different place again. This time, they were surrounded by tall, dead trees, and the ground was covered in a thick layer of fog. She could hear strange whispers and moans coming from the fog, and she felt like she was being pulled towards something. "Toto, we have to get out of here," she said, but Toto was trembling with fear. As they walked, Dorothy saw a figure emerge from the fog. It was a tall, thin man with a pale face and black eyes. He wore a long, black coat, and his hands were bony and skeletal. Dorothy felt a chill run down her spine, and she tried to run, but the man grabbed her arm. "Let go of me," she screamed, but the man only smiled a sickly grin. "Why would I do that, little girl?" he asked in a cold, raspy voice. "You and your little dog are exactly what I've been looking for." Dorothy tried to pull away, but the man's grip was like a vice. Toto barked and growled, but it seemed to have no effect on the man. Dorothy's heart was pounding in her chest, and she felt tears streaming down her face. "Please let us go," she begged, but the man only laughed. "You're in my world now, little girl," he said, his eyes glowing with malice. "And in my world, there are no happy endings." Dorothy felt a surge of fear and desperation wash over her. She had to get away from this man and find a way back home. She closed her eyes and prayed for help, and then she felt a sudden gust of wind. When she opened her eyes again, she saw that the man had let go of her arm, and she was standing in the middle of a field of poppies. Toto barked happily, and Dorothy felt a sense of relief wash over her. But then she realized that the poppies were making her feel drowsy. She stumbled and fell to the ground, and Toto curled up beside her, whimpering. Dorothy tried to stay awake, but the poppies were too strong. She felt like she was sinking into a deep, dark hole, and she could hear the man's laughter echoing in her mind. She closed her eyes and prayed for someone to save her. But no one came. As she drifted off to sleep, Dorothy knew that she was in grave danger. She didn't know where she was or who she could trust. All she knew was that she had to keep fighting and find a way back home, no matter what horrors awaited her on this twisted and terrifying journey. And so, she closed her eyes and tried to summon her courage, hoping that she would survive the nightmarish land of Oz.